Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Michael. And thanks, Noel-Ann and Tony, for the initial invitation. So I'm going to put a link in the chat if colleagues want to access that, then you can access the slides for the presentation. If you'd prefer to do it on a separate device, I'll once I share, which hopefully now you can see my screen, you should be able to see on the screen a QR code that you can scan with your own device. So I note from Florian and Nick's abstracts that they will be talking directly and explicitly about exams. I'm going to take a little bit more of a holistic view, and I will eventually get to exams explicitly, but I want to talk a little bit about compassion, a little bit about one lens through which we can think about change in terms of our assessment practices, and that's through decentering grades, otherwise known as ungrading, because I think it's a really useful way to do things. If you do scan the code or follow the link that I put in the chat, then you will have access to the links, but of course I'll share the slides at the end anyway, and you'll be able to follow any of the links because it will be something of a whistle stop. I have put a timer on, so I'm going to try and keep myself to the time. I should say that I work at King's College London, but I used to work at Greenwich, Tony and Noel-Ann, some years ago now, not in maths. My discipline is history, but I'm more into faculty development now, and I am on the King's Transforming Assessment for Students at King's Operation Group, which is TASK for short, and I lead on AI and innovation in education. But really, it's compassionate pedagogy, pedagogies of care that is the thing that drives me, as well as digital education things. So let's go. From Evelyn and John Dewey, quite some time ago, over 100 years ago, and I've got another quote that's even older than this later, who said, "If we teach today's students as we taught yesterday's, we rob them of tomorrow." And in many ways, I think what we're trying to operationalize in the 21st century is not a 20th century pedagogy and assessment system, but a 19th century one. And already it was being critiqued in the early part of the 20th century. And still, you know, despite everybody's good efforts to include active approaches, to make lectures more dynamic, to move away from tried and tested and established conservative, some would say, pedagogic practices, by and large, the default that most students can expect from a university experience is lecture, seminar, or lecture lab, plus essay or multiple choice or series of questions and or exams, perhaps with a few presentations thrown into the mix to mix things up a little bit. Effectively, today's students, not 1915 today's students, but 2025 today's students are being taught not like yesterday, but the day before yesterday and the day before that, all the way back reaching into the 19th century. And the reason why I'm interested in particular in AI is because I think that this is the thing that will finally leverage change, even though we've got decades of scholarship and research behind us, both generalized and pedagogies within disciplines like mathematics, that shows that there are perhaps better and more fulfilling, or at least more diverse ways that we can achieve the goals of ensuring that our students are learning, but they're also in learning with a sense of their well-being in mind, with a sense of broadening the scope and widening participation, as most of our policy documents say we are doing, but how effective we do that, I don't know. So my interests are nicely connected, I think. If you follow this link later, it will take you to a mini infographic of something that I developed with a colleague here at King's called Rebecca Lindner, and it's a Humanifesto for a pedagogy of care. And it's 10 principles that we use as a starting point for discussing how we can be more compassionate in what we do. The second link here will take you to a post on my blog, which is about what ungrading is and some of the ways that we can operationalize that with some additional sources, and I'll talk more about that today. And my current job, looking at AI and innovation, led me to write this piece, amongst other things, for the Teachers Going Gradeless blog, where I've suggested that AI isn't just about artificial intelligence. It's also about academic integrity, and it's an opportunity for, as it says here, assessment innovation. And that's what's going to be part of my focus today. Before we do that, though, I would very much like you to give me your data, which is what everybody's interested in at the moment. Follow the link or go to menti.com and use the code 25337830, or scan the code and do it on a separate device. And just give me your instinctive reactions to these statements here. So yes is on the left, no is on the right, ambivalence is in the middle, and you've got a number of statements. And I'd like you just to use your slider to position yourself and then see where you stand in relation to other people. As you're doing that, excuse me, as you're doing that, I will read them through just to make sure that everybody can access those, or at least hear what they say. So the first one says, expert lecturers can distinguish the quality of work to a precision of a few percentage points. Second one says, double marking ensures fairness and reliability. The third says, most grades lack implicit meaning. What does a 2-1 actually mean? The third one says, today's students are more likely to cheat than 50 years ago. We have too much marking to do. And the final one, AI means students will be more likely, that should say, more likely to cheat. So let's see where we are. So if you know Mentimeter, you'll know that the mean appears, see, I'm using a mathematical term. The mean appears in the little circle there, and the spread is represented by this line here. So each person will be somewhere represented on that spread there. So you can see we've got a broad spread here, somewhat of a tendency towards yes here, a really interesting spread here. No real spread here, real dominance of the yes here. Unsurprisingly, I am addressing academics after all, and here we have an interesting spread as well. So the first thing that this will tell you is that there is no real consensus in this space other than we have got too much marking to do. But one of the interesting things, I'm going to deal with that one first. Everybody I talk to says they've got too much marking to do. And I will say to them, how about if I told you ways that I could reduce your marking load? Let's see what assignment we can lose. Oh, no. Oh, no. I don't want you to take any of my assignments. It's a really interesting tension between everybody saying, I've got too much marking to do, and nobody really being willing to relinquish one of their assessments. And getting underneath that, I think, is part of the activity that we need to do to explore what it is that's driving that resistance to assessment reduction. I say to, my discipline, as I said, is history. I say to historians, look, you're wedded to the essay. We need to talk about the essay. What needs to change? How can we make it a more robust and authentic and genuine assessment, and at the same time more reliable, and something where we can be more confident that the student is the author of that work? I say to them, what about reducing that 3,000 word essay on your 15 credit module to 2,000 words, and using the 1,000 words, the notional 1,000 words, to do the marking and feedback and authentication in person with each student. Trust me, it's scalable. How long does it take to mark 3,000 word essay? Oh, I can do it in half an hour, said the most confident and cocky historians that I work with. And I say, okay, well, what if I said that you can do every student in 15 minutes? They don't believe me, but where we've tried it, it's worked an absolute treat. And the difference is the student writes 2,000 words. I will have a skim read of it, and then I'll sit that student down in front of me for 15 minutes, record the meeting, get an AI summary of that meeting, and I will ask them 2 or 3 killer questions on what they have written. And on the basis of what they reply to me in that dialogic process, they will reveal to me whether they know that stuff or not. And I can do the feedback instantaneously and think about what the grade is, saving time. People don't believe me until they try it, and it absolutely works. But the will to change is the thing that I have the biggest battle with. And I'm sure it will be the same with some of those things, as Tony's already alluded to, in your disciplinary area. But some of these other things here as well are really, really interesting. People will say, yes, double marking ensures fairness and reliability. Other people will say it doesn't. Where it's not double blind, for example, you find that junior academics, GTAs, who often do double marking, will simply be looking to the more senior colleague for the steer. And surprise, surprise, their percent grade will marry up. I know that in a lot of things that you do in maths, there is a right or wrong answer, but I also know that it's much more sophisticated than that. And showing you're working is important. The use and application of certain techniques and formulae is also fundamental. So there are multiple ways, even subjective ways, of assessing things, even in the domain of mathematics. The expert lecturers one is a really, really interesting one, because I think that we're working with a nonsensical system where we're trying to determine whether someone's worth a 54 or a 56. I just think it's a nonsense. I really do. But some of you clearly don't agree with me on that. And other things as well. We use grades as proxies, right? I work at King's. Most of our students are AAA students, and most of them come away with a first. So what is the point of that first? I got a degree at King's means the same thing for the vast majority of our students. They're already highly qualified. We're already getting the cream of the crop here. Why are we worried about differentiating their grades and spending all that time justifying whether it's this, that, or the other? Have they met a competence level to a certain degree? Now, people say, well, yeah, but the whole edifice is built on this. Employers want it, all of this kind of stuff. And then I will say to them, yeah, but what about the highest achievement in academia, the PhD? What grade did you get for yours? And then they say, oh, well, that's not graded. That's pass or fail, but I got, minor modifications or whatever, something like that. People are always looking for a gradation, even where it's not graded. But if the highest kind of assessment we do in academia can be pass fail, competence based, have you succeeded or have you not, then why couldn't we be doing more of that elsewhere? And that's the question that I want to explore later. The reason I want to explore it is because of things like this. And that is because if you care, as I'm sure all of you do, because you're all here, you're here because you're motivated to be here. That's the first step towards achieving change. But what you will find, and what many of you will say, is, yeah, that's all very well, but PSRB don't allow us to do that. That's all very well, but senior profs in my department won't have any of this. That's all very well, but the quality assurance people will say we can't do this. That's all very well, but the academic integrity people will say we can't do this. We're at odds very often in our desire to change with the institutions that we work in. And Bell Hooks expresses it with great clarity here. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to effect change. That doesn't mean that we can't, with collectives like this, start lobbying and pushing and trying to navigate some of that change and make suggestions and make changes. And I've got a set of interventions that you could consider. And even if you just start at the very foundational one, the very baseline one, that will be making a difference. What I would say is that there are people in universities in the UK working within these strict environments at odds with the systems that they're operating in, who are doing amazing and incredible things that would shock you. So the Vice Dean Education in one of the faculties at UCL that I used to work with allows students to give themselves grades on their assessment. And the only caveat she puts in is, you're going to have to justify it to me if my mental assessment of what your grade should be doesn't tally with that. In 3 years doing this, she's only had one student that chanced his arm and tried to give himself a first. And when they sat down, he said, actually, I can't justify it at all. And he regraded himself much lower. And it's really interesting, some of the conceptualizations and assumptions that are challenged when you implement a process like that. More reasons. I think there are some big questions we need to ask ourselves. We need to ask, how much are our assessments about robustness and reliability and rigor and confidence for the external examiners and the PSRBs and the institution and the Office for Students and the blooming Daily Mail that seems to be breathing down every university's neck these days, versus what we should be about, which is good pedagogy, good learning, and genuine and reliable and authentic and valid assessment of a student's capabilities. It's really easy to set up a multiple choice exam that everybody does, put them in a hall, walk up and down in squeaky shoes. But is that the best way of measuring, especially given some of the context that Tony shared with us at the very beginning? I think perhaps the scales have gone too far in the direction of serving those people who like authentication and consistency and reliability at the expense of validity and authenticity. And another one as well, which will have a particular nuance in mathematics, I'm aware of this, but how much are our current assessments weighted towards writing things down? If we think about when a baby is born, they listen first, all other things remaining equal, of course, and then they learn to babble, which becomes language eventually. Then they learn to read, and then they learn to write. In life, we use those communication skills in pretty much proportional measure to the rate at which we learn them. So we listen most, speak next most, read next most, and we write the least. But in assessment, we invert that. So we get people to be writing more than they're doing all of those other things. And actually, these skills are the skills that employers are asking for: the ability to listen and understand, the ability to articulate and explain. So why are they not central to our assessments? Well, it goes back to the previous point, because we're obsessed with reliability and replicability in this space, rather than the skills we want to develop and the well-being of the students. Now, to link that to the specifics of what I said I would use as my primary lens today, and that is ungrading, I go to a common idiom, a phrase that you've probably heard, the idea that you don't fatten a pig by weighing it. My livestock does not get any bigger the more I put it on a scale. Likewise, students' brains don't grow. The more we assess them, the more we check them, the more we examine them. They grow through evolution and development and dialogue and discussion and application and all the other things that we're trying to get them to do. So I have to remember that the summative assessments that we do in particular are proxies for the stage at which students have reached. And actually, given the narrow grading bands that we have, first, 2-1, 2-2, third, doesn't give us much scope really. And even if we use percentage grades, where are the benchmarks? We have internalized sense of these things. And the arguments about grades predate even the Dewey's writing about changes in pedagogy and necessary changes in practice. This from Finkelstein in 1913. I'm going to read it aloud, even though I am aware you can read off the screen, but just to emphasize a few points. When we consider the practically universal use in all education institutions of a system of marks, whether numbers or letters, to indicate scholastic attainment of the pupils or students in these institutions, and we remember how very great stress is laid by teachers and pupils alike upon these marks, so that really does foreshadow what Tony was talking about earlier about well-being and stress and anxiety in exams as real measures, real, underline, emphasize, of indicators of attainment. We can but be astonished at the blind faith that has been felt in the reliability of these marking systems. So we do these things in the name of reliability, but well over 100 years ago, people were even saying we're fooling ourselves. If you want something a bit more recent, Chris Rust, researcher, or emeritus now from Oxford Brookes, I believe, much current practice in the use of marks and the arrival at degree classification decisions is not only unfair, but is intellectually and morally indefensible and statistically invalid. That should make any mathematician quake in their boots. And what do? We condone it by buying into it year on year on year on year. So we've got a problem. If you agree with my assessment here, you don't have to, and you can argue. It's perfectly okay. I'm not telling you what to think, just telling you what I think. But there's a lot of research and a lot of pedigree in this space, but certain decisions are made and certain aspects and approach and conventions are established that are hard to break, probably not for reasons of good teaching and learning. Finally, here's another quote from systematic review from Shinska and Tanner that said grades can dampen existing intrinsic motivation, enhance fear of failure, reduce interest, decrease enjoyment, anxiety, hamper performance, blah, blah, blah. So many things. So what can we do? I think that there are things that we can all do if we think about ungrading. That is moving away from obsession with grades, so decentering grades or taking grades away from that central focus that a lot of students have, which undermines and impacts and impedes their ability to enjoy learning and learn for its own sake and do all the things that I felt I was privileged enough to enjoy when I was doing my undergraduate 30 years ago at Thames Poly, as Greenwich once was. So the first thing is to arrive in any situation with healthy skepticism. Think about the things that I've been arguing today and question the received wisdom. Maybe think about ungrading something that you might have originally given a grade to. So say to students, I'm going to give you 100 questions. I'm not going to give you a point per question. I'm not going to give you any points. I don't want you to come up with a percentage. I want you to resist the temptation to count how many you got right and how many you got wrong and see what difference it makes. Or think about something that requires written feedback or audio feedback or something like that and completely withhold the grade. Or if you need to give them the grade, withhold it and give it later or something like that. You can do all sorts of things like that. You can conceal grades within the feedback. You can withhold. You can negotiate the grade after they've shown that they've engaged with the feedback. You can modify assessments to design out grading assumptions. And you can even get students to collaborate on determining grades, as per the example that I gave earlier. All of these things, I would argue, wherever you work, whatever your institution is, all of these things you can do within the existing quality assurance structure that exists at your university. And that is probably something that will make you go, are you sure, Martin? I don't think you know how rotten and strict and horrible they all are at our place, or whatever it is. But all of these things can be done because it's about the framing and the organization. And if you really think that they can't be done, then maybe they could be done in first year undergraduate to really get the students to value feedback over grades or whatever it happens to be. Next level up, though, boss level, would be things like this. Stop norm referencing students whenever we do that. It occurs quite a lot. Be more in favor of ipsative assessment, which is getting students to think about their own performance, not in light of how everyone in the class did or who was the best or how their mates did or whatever, but how they did on their previous assessment. So thinking about, a runner, for example, if I'm running 100 meters, I can tell you something for nothing. I'm never going to get to Usain Bolt's speed. There's no point in me benchmarking myself against him. I benchmark myself against my fastest time today, 25 seconds or whatever it is. And then what I'm going to try and do is get that down to 24 in the next month and then down to 23. Benchmarking against myself, ipsative approach can really help. Then going even further can be thinking about grading only major summative work, not grading anything else. Minimal grading, so switching from percentages to A to F, from A to F to pass fail. Thinking only of final summative grades or doing more program level or programmatic assessment, so a grade per program across a module. It's possible to do these things in the UK. Self-grading of students, more dialogue, more peer review, students grading themselves for entire modules. I've seen that happen at UCL as well. It's also happening here at King's. And as I said, program level grades. All of these things are quite possible. While you're doing that and you're thinking about the students and their well-being and what it is that creates anxiety and what it is that gives them the second-hand stresses that we're all under because we've got to fulfill the requirements of a very struct and flawed system, is thinking about ways in which you can modify those assessments themselves, as well as the grading approaches that go with it. So thinking about the issues, I've already said that, but then also auditing the assessments themselves. What is the point of this assessment? What am I actually trying to measure here? What am I trying to achieve? What am I trying to do? Because sometimes when you ask that question, I'm sure none of you are like this, but when I ask some colleagues in some departments, what is the point of this assessment? Oh, we've always done it. We've always done it. That's not an answer to my question. I want to know what it achieves, because we often wonder why students aren't throwing themselves with love at these assessment activities. And then we realize that they've done something similar on another module, or that it's too hard, or it's too easy, or it's not inspiring, or it's not related to what they want to do in their careers. So what is the point? How valid is it against what it is you're trying to teach them? So that alignment there, and how well does it flow with everything? I realize I've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. What we want to be doing is building bridges, not walls. A lot of the narratives and the talk around AI at the moment, people are talking about detection and scrutiny, and with apologies to Florian, a return to the exam halls. I think that all of this kind of stuff just promotes or evokes a sense of distrust. It further cleaves a gap between us and our students. And if we can't connect with our students, we can't be trusted by our students, we can't trust them, that is not a recipe for good well-being of them and of us. We've got to think about ourselves as well in this process. More dialogue, more interaction, more talking. I gave the example of the history essay. Why couldn't you do that in maths? Instead of giving them 100 ways to prove they can operationalize a particular calculation, just get them to work through one for you in front of you. Why can't you do that? Do you do that? Is that part of your assessment diet? If so, how is it working? If not, why not? And holistically coherent as well. And challenging conventions. There's a piece coming up from a former colleague of mine in Liberating Learning journal that I'm co-editing, a special issue due for release at the end of the next month. One of the articles is on our over-reliance and dependence on anonymity, because where you might gain, you're also losing various things. I would commend to you this very thoughtful potential from Dr. Sarah Eaton, who talks about human AI hybrid writing, a period of post-plagiarism, a necessity for us to really interrogate and review everything that we're doing. And also, I'm going to, have I put it in here? No, I haven't put it in here. I would also commend Kath Ellis and Kane Murdoch's thing on academic integrity. It's a really interesting framing that feeds into the debates around exams. I've got two final links for you before I disappear. One on exams, one on cheating. They're both on my blog. This is the one addressing the question about whether we should get students back in the exam halls, and there's some reading there. I tried to be as balanced as I could on that particular one. Sorry, I can't see my links now. Oops, there we go. And then the other one is this one on cheating. Start with a really incredible statistic there. And to answer that question about whether students have been cheating the same over the last 50 years, there's a study that actually reinforces that. They have, and it's massive, and a lot of it happens actually in exams. So exams are not foolproof. Exams are not cheat-proof. In fact, bone conduction glasses, impersonation, hidden earpieces, it's all going on. What we want to be doing is making students want to do the assessment, not trying to find ways to force them to do the assessment or trick them in one way or the other. I'm going to stop sharing. I'll put a link to the slides in the chat, but I thank you very much for your attention, if you are indeed still listening.